Hello and welcome to another managerial special from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm Craig Savage and with me is Mr. Daniel Cody. Normally we do a championship managerial special, but considering this team is close to home, well, even though Daniel Cody's moved up north, and you can see it's the club that's behind him in Luton Town, are currently in League One. They sacked Matt Bloomfield and hired former youth player in Jack Wilshere, the former Arsenal player. Uh, let's start off the manager that got sacked. Matt Bloomfield joined in January of this year, lasted the 10 months. A win percentage of 36%, which is although higher than the previous manager, Rob Edwards, but Rob Edwards had the luxury of the Premier League.
Yeah, we were sort of discussing this just before we started, weren't we? It's a bit higher than I think we were expecting on paper, but it if we go back to January, I think that the key thing we all said at the time, whether it be privately in these episodes, whatever, is it was a gamble from the club. And quite often our managerial appointments are gambles. And again, we've gone later down the episode, we'll be going down that track again. But it was a gamble at a time when other clubs were going for experienced championship pros. You had Gary Rowett going to Oxford, John Eustace going to Derby, etc., etc. And ultimately, we were one of the clubs who gambled on a manager that didn't have championship experience. And I know he had a short stint at Colchester, but generally didn't have much experience outside of Wycombe as a player or manager. So it was always going to be a 50-50 chance of succeeding. Obviously, Rob Edwards had done the unthinkable previously, and Nathan Jones had been incredibly popular before that. So it was tough acts to follow. And I always felt a bit guilty because I've said it to you many times. I always got like a PE teacher vibe, and it felt really harsh to say because he's clearly a good coach and manager. He's done it at other clubs, and he had spells with us as well. But he just never really had that authority or that motivation and passion never came across in the way that probably the previous two managers were such great speakers, which I think maybe doomed him a little bit from the start. And then when you consider the initial form, particularly without scoring goals at home, it only got worse from there, really.
Yeah, he came in the middle of the January transfer window. Obviously, players in and out, and it was a debate of the formation. Obviously, he had that 4-2-3-1 style. He can really rotate his front four in a way, but it never seemed to come across that at Luton.
Well, yeah, and I think to be honest, that's probably my biggest criticism of his time at Luton is he came in and you remember that initial interview where he talked about playing 4-2-3-1, playing attacking football. He specifically said it. And then I think he tried it for probably 3 or 4 games and then reverted to the back five, and we'd never seen anything else since really until maybe the last 2 or 3 matches of his tenure where he was clutching at straws and trying every formation. And I think that's probably the hardest thing, especially as players, if you've got a manager coming in saying this is what we're going to do and they give up on it after 4 or 5 games, then after a summer where he's been, you would imagine, spearheading the recruitment drive that's seen a huge turnover of the squad with a lot of those former Premier League players and heroes moving on. And then comes into the season with most of his own signings and his own squad, and then still plays the back five. And we've looked disjointed all season, to be fair. Even in games we've won early on, we've never really carved teams open from open play. We've never really looked like winning a game comfortably, creating lots of chances. We've very rarely had shots on target away from home, even. So it was just a bit strange, particularly from the summer onwards. So obviously, the West Brom game was the disaster after a good run, and getting relegated on the final day in that manner when all you needed was a draw to then go and concede five was ridiculous. But I think this season's probably surprised me more just how disjointed it was and the fact that he didn't really try to stick to his principles, which if you're going to go down, you want to go down your way, don't you? Rather than just sort of the job petering out because you've tried to find a middle ground. It seems a little bit odd, really.
Do you think the obviously 12 wins? I can't recall one. Probably one. I can only recall one win that was actually convincing.
Yep.
The way at Burton, I'd say it
Yeah.
was probably the only game I can think of. But even in that time, that little stint in the Championship, we never. I know, obviously, at relegation back, you're going to get scrappy games, but we didn't really look like we were going to turn the corner.
No, and we didn't look like scoring goals in a lot of the games either. I mean, the one that sticks out for me, and I've mentioned it a few times, was that Hull away game at the end of March, who obviously in the end survived at our expense on the final day. And neither side deserved to win it. And neither side, based on that performance, I said it quite often on the prediction show, deserve to stay up based on that performance because they were both poor. And I think that's the thing I find hardest is when a manager comes in, and for Matt Bloomfield, it felt like he gave up his own style. He gave up his principles and his chance to put his stamp on Luton. And unfortunately, he's gone down with a bit of a whimper. And I know things were poor before he came in. We were already on the slide, but it never really felt like, as you say, it just didn't feel like it was going to pick up at any point.
Let's go to that West Brom game, the final game of last season.
Do we have to?
Unfortunately, we do because I think this plays a big part in Matt Bloomfield's managerial career at Luton. Obviously, in the end, they only needed a point. To obviously just all you got to do is match Hull. Do you think he was tactically, I'm not saying inept, but savvy to get the job done,
Well,
or
yeah,
do you, or do you basically blame the players as well?
well, there's an element of both. And obviously, we saw from the clear out that followed in the summer, and I think we knew it from the hangover from the Premier League. There were a few players that perhaps didn't want to be there that ended up staying. Obviously, due to injuries and things, there were players that couldn't move on when perhaps they would have. And obviously, a lot more have moved on since. But it was a mix of the both because Matt Bloomfield was playing a system that he'd not played before regularly. I've made my feelings quite clear on some of the players that were there in that system at the time, and that was to an extent outside of his control because he only had half a January window to work with, and a lot of those players had been bought in the summer previous. And that's where a lot of Luton's problems had stemmed from off the pitch as well. But it was a mix of the two. Tactically, he didn't get that game right, and it's a huge game to get wrong. And in games where we'd been very tight in recent weeks before that, to then go out and produce a side that's just so open at the back. And when it got to 3 or 4, let's be honest, we gave up, which is really sad because we then got a couple of goals back at the end, and in the end could have drawn that game if we'd maybe not given up at 3-1. But it was a mix of the two. But I just feel sad for him because I think he's a good coach. It was the wrong job at the wrong time for him, and it was the wrong job at the wrong time for the club. And I just hope that with the new appointment we'll talk about in a minute, that history isn't repeating itself.
So let's get to the summer. Obviously, a big clear out. Obviously, the expectation was there. Obviously, I predicted Luton to win it.
Naively,
You
never learn.
still happen. It can still happen under the new manager. No, but obviously, he had the summer. There was still some decent players in. Well, even the recruitment, there's some decent players that have come in. What? Why do you think it's not worked out for him in terms of maybe certain players are missing, or certain players didn't get recruited in the right areas, or once again not tactically savvy to beat teams that Luton should be beaten?
Yeah, and I don't want to. It's hard because we always try not to fall into that trap, having been the
The
underdog for
teams
so
like
many
Luton.
years. And look, it's probably a different situation, isn't it, for the club? The last 2 years we have been among the favourites, and it's something we've not been used to in the whole journey up, really, since the conference, where ironically is the last time we struggled for a significant period of time. But like you say, a lot of good players came in. A lot of players probably understandably moved on, and the wage bill probably had to be reduced from the Premier League as well. And we are left with a good squad, but we're not left with a particularly balanced one. I mean, I was in the group chat with you boys on deadline day, just wondering how many more strikers were going to be signed. It was getting ridiculous at the end, and you do have to question the recruitment a bit in terms of squad balance, and only having one natural left sider fit and available for the first half of the season, but you've got 9 strikers at the club, and you also have to question something that's becoming a bit of pattern with us is signing players who aren't able to stay fit and aren't fit when they join the club. We've already had a Doffin and Al Hamadi this year who have come in and not been able to feature at all because of fitness or because of issues with the medical. And we've left ourselves in a position where we're probably shorter than we need to be. And it has reflected a bit on the pitch. It's been an ever changing team. I don't think he's known what his best 11 is at any stage this season. There are
I don't think he's
some,
known his best 11 since
no,
he first came in.
no, you're probably right on that front. And there are obviously players that have been stalwarts for us before who are coming back from injury and not able to break in. And whether that's a fitness thing only or whether there's a psychological edge. And it's probably the other issue left with the squad, isn't it? Which is we've lost so much of the character from it. And I know it's such a simple thing to say, but when you went through the spine of our team before, they weren't the most talented footballers. All of the centre midfielders we've got at the club now are probably more technically capable than Pelly Ruddock and Panzu, but there was someone who would give everything and beyond and was tactically smart and would be able to cover positions and maybe just cover for that slower centre half and fullback and things that we haven't got now. We haven't got a lot of mobility. We've not got a lot of quality in the mind. We're very light in terms of characters now, and it's the biggest thing I criticised last year. And now we're left with a young squad and a few little flittering parts of that spine from the Premier League era, which has led to these disjointed displays. But to answer your question from before, yes, tactically, there's also been issues because the last 4 games in charge, he played what 4 or 5 different formations during those games. So he clearly didn't know what his best team or his best setup was. And it was reflected, I think we can both say, in a lot of the performances we've seen this year.
Do you think the fans, um, let's say, obviously from that final game of the season, had doubts in their mind whether Bloomfield was the right man to take them back up?
I think it's fair to say there were probably doubts, and probably even from the start because of where the club was and maybe not going and getting that experienced manager that other clubs at the time had. But this season, let's be fair, the fans were on board at the start, and the first game nearly bored us all to death, but we got out of jail with an own goal. We had a couple of wins against teams near the bottom of the division or expected to be there in Burton and Peterborough. But some of the performances have been really rotten, and it's been hard to gloss over. I mean, I was at the Lincoln game a few weeks ago, where I think probably the first time the fans really turned, and it turned into sort of the conference days with Paul Buckle and
Richard
Paul
Money.
Richard Money, Paul Card, and those sorts of people. It was a difficult spell. Gary Bravin's the name I was thinking of. I
Gary
kept
Brown,
saying
not
Paul
Paul
Card, and I
Carden.
was going for the player. Gary Bravin's the one I was thinking of, but it just got to that stage where it was untenable even from that game. And I know we snuck the win against Doncaster after, but then the Blackpool performance for 80 minutes and then what happened against Stevenage, it was never going to last. And I appreciate the fans probably had doubts, and I appreciate at times the fans, and naturally that sort of reaction is never going to be helpful to a young team struggling with confidence. But it was it wasn't the results for me that was a big problem. It was the when a manager's been in for nearly a year and you have no idea what they're trying to do. That for me is the hardest thing as a fan. When you have no idea what style they're trying to play, you have no idea what formation they want to play. Players don't seem to be able to react or to be motivated by the manager. That's where the bigger issues come. And I think all of the wheels just fell off the wagon probably from the start of September onwards this year.
Well, let's move on to the new man in charge, a man who's younger than both of us. Well, actually, you're the same age as
He's
us,
not
aren't you?
younger than me.
Jack Wilshere is the new Luton Town manager, the second youngest Luton Town manager in history. We never get Luton never dictate how long his contract's for, but a press statement is as follows. We're excited to announce the return of Jack Wilshere to Luton Town Football Club as the new first team manager. The 33-year-old is back at the club where it all started for him in a centre of excellence before joining Arsenal at the age of 9 and embarking on an elite playing career that saw him win 34 England caps. Wilshere, who has held coaching positions in the Arsenal Academy after a short spell as Norwich City interim manager at the tail end of last season, is eager to get down to business at the club where he started his football journey as a youngster. I won't go into what he said, but obviously Jack Wilshere is absolutely delighted to be back at Luton. He's still local from Hitchin and always had that Luton connection. Chris Powell is his number 2. So a very experienced man right next to him. I'll be interested to see if there's any other coaches that come in as well. A rookie manager, a Nathan Jones-esque type of man.
Or Graham Jones.
No, I think there's a difference between the two. I really do.
I do as well, hopefully.
Initial thoughts, because Jack Wilshere was obviously now named. There were other people in the frame. Richie Wellens, who's currently at Leyton Orient, he was one of the favourites. There was a brief bit of John Brady, the former Northampton manager, and then just ridiculous names behind it. So, initial thoughts, Jack Wilshere as new Luton Town manager.
Yeah, intrigued. I was I won't lie to you, and I won't lie because I've said it to you, so you will call me out if I said otherwise. I was worried at first, very worried, because I didn't feel an inexperienced, or in this case, a complete rookie manager is what we needed at this point. Going back to when we had that last really difficult spell in the conference, we had a John Still before Nathan Jones. Nathan Jones wasn't taking over from a crisis, and this is virtually crisis point for a club that was in the Premier League just over a year ago. I was much more confident and almost completely relieved when I saw that Chris Powell was going to be assistant manager. It's the biggest thing we talk about in the Championship manager specials all the time. If a young, inexperienced manager's coming in, they have got to get experience in that dugout with them. And when they don't, it can often go horribly wrong, whether that's a new manager or a manager at a new level. And obviously, if you go back to January and who I wanted to be appointed when the Bloomfield situation come up, and there were people like Steve Cooper and Danny Roll about, my thoughts on Danny Roll. If you can't go and get him, which now we can't because we've fallen too far, go and get the man who works with him. And Chris Powell is exactly that, obviously, and has guided young managers and coaches before, as well as people forget winning this division as a manager just over a decade ago with Charlton. So brilliant man to have in the dugout with Jack Wilshere. I'm interested by what I've seen this week. He's spoken far better and far more assertively than I expected. I think we probably still remember him as that sort of quite injury prone player, which will obviously suit well the training ground here, but also as that it's only a couple of years ago he was messing about on the radio in the afternoon and you're not really seeing that serious side of him. Whereas now he seems to have taken to coaching really quickly. He's worked with some fantastic people, even if he's not been working at first team level regularly. And obviously, there was a lot of talk last summer that he was going to get that Norwich job before they obviously went for Liam Manning. So it's interesting to have him in. I can't say I'm completely confident, and neither can you, because it's a complete gamble. We don't know what to expect, but it's probably a more appropriate time to take a gamble than it was last January. While it's not been a good start to the season, the club, in terms of table position, isn't in crisis point. There is a young squad with a lot of technical talent, and it's a squad that needs mentors and needs leadership. And there's, as we discussed earlier, maybe not as much of it left on the pitch as we would perhaps like in that spine of the team, which I think will get addressed in January. But to have some more of that in the background of the coaching team is fantastic. So I'm interested to see how Jack Wilshere gets on. I'm looking forward to seeing it on Saturday, but Chris Powell is the bit that gave me the most confidence, if I'm being honest, out of it, because what a career he's had as a coach and as a player previous.
Let's get to his press conference with the media. The first thing he mentioned was Nathan Jones. And then for me, that tweaked. I was like, yeah, this feels like a Nathan Jones type of persona, type of answer. Yeah, I've got my Nathan Jones pretty much on my legs were going, but I can feel like I can get into coaching and look at how he done it and how the players were reacting. Now, if Jack Wilshere can replicate what Nathan Jones did,
that's a big ask, by the way.
Obviously that's Nathan Jones had years, and obviously by the time Jack Wilshere went to train at Luton, and that was the summer of the promotion in 2022. So Jones had years of these players. Are we going to see that little deja vu with Jones and Hart, with Wilshere and Powell? But the difference is we don't really know what style of play, unless you have watched Arsenal youth team or the last two games for Norwich, where both games are dead rubbers and it's easily to do it. How is he going to, what style he's going to have? Is it going to, he has said he wants to be aggressive. That's what Luton fans want to hear. Bloomfield said he wanted to be aggressive, but never really showed that. And I think it all depends in the first 5 minutes. If someone comes to that crunching tackle near the enclosure, that's going to get people going.
Yeah, and it's a good
Obviously,
job.
Tackle fairly, not a smash and like get a red card, but tackle fairly by a good tackle.
Well, yeah, I was about to say it's a good job Liam Walsh is injured, because otherwise it would have been a red card and a disastrous debut. But yeah, I kind of agree with what you're saying. It's got a good impression to it so far this week. The fact that he came and trained for that summer with Nathan Jones and saw the club probably on the way to its peak and on that way up is a good thing to have in the dressing room for us. But then you could say several of the players at the club were in that position, and that hasn't made a blind bit of difference this year. So, it can be given or taken. The thing that actually I picked out at the press conference was different to yours. It was when he was asked about, as managers always are now, about their philosophy and their playing style and the project and all of that. And he said, it's lovely for how I want to play in the future, but for now, we just need to get a team that can win games and can get the fans behind them again by giving everything. And there are so many managers who come in, like Bloomfield did, and said, I'm gonna do this. And then if they don't succeed at it or they can't deliver it, immediately they're on the back foot. Whereas to say that, don't worry about my style for now, let's just get the boys working hard, let's get the fans back on side and let's try and build a bit of momentum. That for me was a nice relief to have in a young coach because you don't often see that now. It's always about philosophy and I want to play this way and that way, which it was great that he didn't. Because when we've had success before with Nathan Jones, with Rob Edwards, they have adapted their style from what they would probably normally do. And in Nathan Jones' case, we adapted style 2 or 3 times during his stints in charge. So that was a relief for me. It does worry me that they've all talked about promotion this year and what they're going to do in the championship next year, because I don't think it's as much of a given as that. But I guess you've got to talk that way, being in the position that we are. But that worries me to an extent because you're putting pressure on yourself that you may live to regret later down the line. But from a style point of view, having listened to him, seeing Chris Powell in a dugout, I'm a lot less worried than I was a week ago. And he's I guess the way to sum it up is he's probably come across a lot more maturely and a lot more developed as a coach than I was expecting when I was here when we heard he was going to be appointed.
I think for me, I think the expectation is to be challenging. Obviously, yeah, start getting wins on the board. That's the main thing. But then I expect Luton still to be challenging up there. I still think playoffs is the absolute minimum. What do you think?
Well, look, ultimately, it's a good time early in the season because we're 5 points off the bottom four and 5 points off the top six. So a good run and you can be right up there straight away. A bad run and it could be a disaster in a few weeks' time. You never know. I mean, on paper, and I hate saying on paper, there are matches against teams in the coming weeks. Certainly the first two that are expected to be further down the division again this year, albeit they're both near us at the moment. Then you've got an FA Cup tie against the National League team and a cup tie, a group stage game against the under 21 side. So potentially there is the good time and an opportunity to build a bit of momentum. But I mean, I would agree with you. Luton, let's not beat around the bush. Forget about stadium monies and all of that sort of stuff. Luton are a side that have got parachute payments, were in the Premier League 18 months ago, and still have some of those players there. So the expectation is going to be inside and out to be involved in a promotion battle and to win promotion back, particularly when you look at some of the other sides that have started pretty poorly as well that were expected to be up there. So it's not a foregone conclusion at the top of that table. But I don't think, obviously, you've talked about the playing style. I don't think that's that important for now. I think the Jack Wilshere identity will come later. But we have to remember as well, you talk about Nathan Jones. His first year, we finished 14th. We were pretty average for a year. And then we really kicked on, had that year in the playoffs, had the promotion. Then it all started to fly. But it was a slower start. And he's a young manager. It's his first senior job. He's going to make mistakes along the way. And given the position the fans are in at the moment, unless there's a little bit of momentum built up in the bank, I do worry a little bit that there might be some problems from the keeping the fans on side point of view. But hopefully, with a couple of early wins, I tell you what, one good performance on Saturday, the fans will be right behind him. If they can see a performance, forget the result, they'll be right on board with him. And that's all he's got to do at the moment. But
Do you think it's result first, then performance comes along later on because then the style grows of working in the training ground, or do you think the performance needs to be there first and then get the result?
I think generally for his first few months, the results are the most important. But I think as a standalone on Saturday for the first game, not even the quality of the performance, the intensity of the performance is going to be the key thing. After that, it's about results. But the fans just need to see a reaction because even at home this year, I know we've got an okay record, but we've limped over the line in games. We've nicked a couple of 1-0s where Wigan's keeper missed a sitter in stoppage time, Doncaster at the bar in stoppage time. We've not been convincing at any point. So I think just a bit of intensity, a little bit of fire in the belly will get the fans on board. But then as you say, at the moment, we're coming towards the middle of the season. We've got to start picking up results sooner rather than later, or you do drift towards that sort of bottom four. So I would say generally results, but Saturday it's all about a performance, and the fans will get behind them if they start quick. Like you say, first 10 minutes, if you're pressing, if you're intense, if you're chasing players down, the fans will get behind you there.
Okay, let's go on to the first five fixtures, as we said. Yeah, home to Mansfield, and then away to Northampton, and then Brighton in the Trophy, and then a tough away trip to Stockport, and then Rotherham at home as the first five games, and then obviously the FA Cup. Don't want to put pressure on Jack, but how many points are you seeing out of those first, well, four league games, and then obviously the Trophy?
It's hard to put points on it. The two home cup games you would expect against an under 21 side and a National League side, you would expect there to be results and performances. But Forest Green have got a young dynamic team, which is our defence's Achilles heel. The first two league games on paper, if you're saying to Luton at the start of the season you want to get promoted, then you've got to beat two sides that are expected to finish in the bottom half. Stockport I had as my champion, so going there I can't go and say that's defining, although that is an away game I'll be at. And then after that, it's a really tricky run. You mentioned the first three or four games being quite nice on paper, but then Stockport, Rotherham, Barnsley, Bolton, Orient is a rotten run of games. But equally, on the flip side for Jack Wilshere, if he picks up two, three, four wins out of those five, you could be back in a promotion mix and look like a hero by the end of November. And suddenly the confidence is back. You're going into January, you can add a little bit of gold dust. So uh, I would like to hope we can win at least two or three of the first five league games and avoid a cup upset. But I think if we get past that Forest Green game, we're struggling a bit. I think that run of league fixtures is going to be potentially a difficult time if he's not got the fans back on board at that point.
Final question for me is: will Jack Wilshere be a success? Considering it's still half of it is still quite young, so that might work in his favour. Do you think? Well, Jack Wilshere, the manager, will be a success.
I don't know. I really want to say yes. If you'd have asked, let's put it this way, if you'd have asked me the day before he was appointed, when we all knew he was coming in, so say Sunday night, I would have said, I'm not convinced. I don't think so. If you ask me now, I think I'm leaning 60-40 the other way because he's impressed me so far this week, more than I expected. I love the fact that Chris Powell's in there with him. And even in the training pictures this week, we saw a few players that seem to have disappeared for several months. So hopefully, you can get a few of those involved. There are some of the players that obviously he will have trained with before, and in a couple of cases, like James Shea would have been with at Arsenal. So there is a familiarity there. As you mentioned right at the top about Wilshere, it's the perfect move for him lifestyle wise. He's not got to move. He lives a couple of towns over. He's local for him. He's not got to worry about it. Even if the worst does happen, it doesn't affect his lifestyle. But I'm more optimistic than I was. So I'm going to say a cautious yes. He will be a success. And the one thing we do know is that barring a disastrous start, Luton will give him the season because I know the last two have been an exception, but generally we're quite generous with giving managers time and stability. But I will say the recruitment side and some of the things happening off the pitch, sports science, medical departments, we've got to find our way again on that front too, because it's not just on the pitch where it's gone wrong since we've gone down.
No, I think January could be very crucial, and it depends what type of player he actually wants in the team. But that is our thoughts on Jack Wilshere, the new Luton Town manager. You've wanted a managerial special on Luton for a League One club. You've got it. We hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget, like this video, subscribe to the Honest Football Podcast. You can follow us on all the socials. We do League One predictions every week. We say we're good at it. We're not.
They're all Craig's and Charlie's thoughts. Do not blame me for some of the League One predictions, please.
Yeah, so if you do want to get involved in that, please do. Also, don't forget the championship predictions. They are back this week after the international break. And we'll see you next time.